listening to Somali Public Radio, live at 90.3 Minneapolis and 106.7 St. Paul. The mention of Somalia often evokes images of horror, pirates, terrorists, and lawless cauldron that export heartbreaking stories. The coverage regularly includes scenes of armed clan militias, emaciated bodies of famine victims, poverty, and appeals for donation. This portrayal was far long propagated by foreign suspects, charlatans, and intermediaries who are short of the competence to provide an ethical and realistic perspective of the Somali conflict, imitating to have an insight of the core issues that haunt the region. In 1992, the New York Times wrote, quote unquote, "Instead of fighting with traditional spears and shields, the clans have more recently conducted their feuds with mortars and machine guns." This statement and many more others in the mainstream media indirectly link the failure of the Somali Republic to the Somali culture, as if the people were predestined to fail. The root causes of the Somali crisis are more modern in origin. They can be traced to at least three 20th century phenomena: colonialism, Cold War international relations, and the Siad Barre dictatorship. The interactions of these modern forces in the post-colonial state ushered in the clan conflict of the 1980s and the inherent chaos of today. Thus, to understand the present crisis, we should look at what preceded it. Guban is a novel that explores the interactions of the late Barre regime, Cold War policies, and the colonial, social, political, and economic conditions. The novel also seeks to offer an alternative narrative to the way Somalia is portrayed by the media. As I flipped through the pages, I was able to identify universal themes of love, dreams, and social responsibility. These themes humanize the Somali struggle through the characters in a way that is both subtle and beautiful. Here with us tonight, the author of the novel, Abdi Latif Ega. Abdi Latif is a longtime resident of Harlem, New York. He's a PhD candidate and a teaching fellow at Columbia University. Abdi Latif has also studied, loves, and plays jazz. He's also a big fan of history, literature, and research of the New World African. Abdi Latif, welcome to Somali Public Radio.
Thank you for having me.
Let me start off by reading an excerpt from the novel. On chapter 23, titled Misleaders, page 154, "Even if you had no encounter with modernity to make you a post-camel man, there was ironically cultivated, open ridicule towards the people and their traditional intelligence transmitted through the centuries. Having experienced the power of Western weapons in their administration through this heavy-handed persuasion, the pastoralists believe, through the incalculation of time, that the power of those the West had chosen because they could read the West's magical texts. The colonial impact and lasting impressions, attitudes, is often discussed in the book. Why was this important for your story?"
Well, it's important because it's what is part of the tapestry of what created what you might call the post-collapse, the so-called collapse. So in venturing into the, if you will, raw materials of what was going on, one has to enunciate everything that is available and was available that contributed to that.
So the colonial legacy was certainly important for the story.
Of course, yes. There are residuals of, as we have racism in the United States, it's a residual of slavery. Everybody knows it, but yeah. So it's not far-fetched to say colonialism or underdevelopment and many other things can be directly linked to the colony. The colony might have disappeared in terms of the physical.
But the influence is still there.
Yes. Influence is by far still there, yes.
Throughout the book, the context was somewhat familiar. Blood, rebels, injustice. At the same time, you attempted to challenge those very images by humanizing the characters and narrative and the whole narrative at large. What was your goal? What were you trying to...
Well, I think one of the biggest things is that what we have in forms of information is a duality of Africans themselves participating in dehumanizing the African personality by portraying images of famine. There's so many books on the child soldier, the almost horrific pornographic violence depicted in books and things like that. So my attempt was to go against the nomenclature of these things, pirates, warlords, and terrorists. In other words, this essentialization of human beings needed a reality check.
So you wanted this story to be different from
It's definitely. I mean, this is the whole thing was to not to pander to that violent, savage African or black figure, but to actually include all the manifestations of what was going on. At the same time, that really departing from that sort of Western catharsis with relationship with big brother, small brother Africa, where no one can do anything. Everything is so violent. We have to step in because they can't take care of it. But what I show in this book is that there's a huge complicity with the Western powers, with modernity, as you will, in bringing about these circumstances.
Indeed, a different approach. This is your first book.
Yes, correct.
The title is in Somali.
Yes.
Guban.
Guban, yes.
It sets in Somalia, a place you're familiar with. It obviously took a lot of time, money, other resources, etc. What was your aim? I mean, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, I don't think it's an inspiration. I think it's actually I saw it as as something that I had to do, and meaning that one is either faced with being silent about invasions. That's the other part of it. When journalists and people like that organize an entire country or a people or a religion in a certain way, it makes it easier for the same people to be invaded, to be displaced, to be killed. In many ways, is stemming from this organization of the nomenclature, which is So I felt it was a duty that I had to do, and actually all. And for my own sake, own health, I think.
Can we say that this was motivated or was written as a political response?
Oh yeah, it's a counter narrative to the corporate media, if anything else.
Speaking of politics, very often in politics, the question of identity comes up. Let's talk about some of the main characters or some of the characters: Tusmo, Hassan, Yusuf, Hogsede, and others. How would you define their identity? And what source do you derive that identity from?
I think first of all, you probably would like to give me your impressions of the first three names, and then I would go further.
Tusmo. Who's Tusmo?
Well, Tusmo is a symbolism of it's almost a little Somaliism inside, because it's the language means example to me, and she is the weakest member of the state. And so when the state coercive powers come to visit her by locking up her husband, she has not much to do.
She became a victim.
Yeah, so she is also a protagonist in the sense that she is the conduit to also explaining the manifestations of that power on her as a citizen and subject.
It seemed in the book.
So example is what her name means in Somali, and she is the example of what happened, and it returns to Guban, which means the other side is burnt.
Very symbolic.
Yeah.
So to look at some of the characters again, you have some characters that it seems the story is very sympathetic to, like Tusmo, even Hogsede. It seemed like the story was very sympathetic to him. And then you have others who worked with the Siad Barre regime that you were a bit. The way that they were portrayed as inhumane, as those who tortured civilians. Could this be viewed as an unfair analysis of the extension of the Somali story?
Well, I think I took, first of all, it's not, what happens is that there's no one individual who tortures anybody, but it's really a state dictate, more so than anything else. What I show is the calumny or the individual traits of a human being in terms of greed and ambition. So even the people who are characters within the state are driven by individual greed and really not having a presence of mind to think in different ways. But you will see that everybody gets a treatment of that, whether it is a nomad chief or somebody. Everyone is driven by a certain thing, and usually it is individual ambition and greed beyond, and they become complicit in doing these things for their own ambition. So what happens is that the state is seen through the ambitions, if you will, or the how can I put it? the human traits of an individual, bad or good, as the reasons towards the collapse. So there's no really one thing that says that this is the reason why this happened, or this, that, or the dictator was like this or like that. But really looking at the people surrounding and what kind of human being, including the American ambassador, who's also very ambitious and
out for his own interest.
Out for his own interest. So that's what you have, a meeting of all these individual characteristics. Some of them, of course, are extreme caricatures, but, these are individuals that we live in.
More with the characters, when we write about, especially fictional stories, and we try to draft an identity of a character, it's usually something that we're very familiar with. You're from Somalia. Were any of these characters actual people that you recall when you were in Somalia, or even in the diaspora?
Well, of course, there's a composite of so many people in one or two. Some might be even more exaggerated than anyone that I have known. But it takes a type of figure to because you have a military guy who's also a business person, and his ambition is to accumulate wealth, not unlike the corporate guy. So those are the things that are actually envisioned. It's not a question of, it's looking at a more complex situation. Look at, for example, there's a socialist general who comes there. The regime itself, to begin with, has aspirations which are Pan-African. They're socialists. They're trying to be more congenial to the egalitarian way of life. But what happens is that it is hijacked by certain individuals. So the meditation is all really actually on individuals and how individuals can shape and form certain things, and not necessarily an entire people or things like that.
What about the setting, various plots? Talk about Guban, the pastoralist lifestyle. Those are things that, are you familiar with?
Yeah, of course. I mean, those are things that I've seen. So, I don't think it's not coming from it's a canvas that I've seen. So, yeah, those are things that I looked at. But they're actually contrasting. Really, if you look at it, it's really in a Fanonian sense, the idea of the colonizer removing all history and implanting one post, and always an oppositional factor between the city dweller, who is the modern guy, and the guy who's coming from the hinterland, which is the nomad. And so one is progressive because they are living in a certain time and they're moving forward. And the point is that there is if you will, there's more sympathy on my side, in the sense that there's a history that precedes the nation state. So that's what I'm actually also looking at. There's evidence of how the hierarchy of things have been organized, and it's always through Western education and things like that.
Okay, we'll go ahead and I'll read that excerpt that I found very interesting. It's on the chapter titled Marital Bliss, page 175 reads, "At first, most lone family settlements were obligated by close clan ties, and generally it was shameful to not feed the travelers and strangers in your midst. Somalis are often depicted as unfriendly to strangers by Hollywood and media. Even here in Minnesota, the community is portrayed as isolated and unwilling to integrate to mainstream America. What were you trying to communicate to the readers, especially pointing out to the hospitality to common strangers in this text?"
Well, I was not making anything up. I was just saying, as a group of people, we're very hospitable. We like to take care of strangers, and we do. It is actually part of our
culture.
Yeah.
That is not shared very often.
Yeah. It's not something far-fetched at all. It's something that is true. When somebody comes, for example, to a settlement or encampment, they're fed and they're given what they want before they go. Yeah, even the family might not have eaten themselves of that meat, but that day they will slaughter one for that person, the wayfarer, as I put it.
You were influenced by writers of African descent, correct?
Yeah, not exclusively, but yeah.
You're a big fan.
But yeah, big fan.
On the back of the novel, it says you're a big fan of African writers. Can you share with us some of your favorite authors?
Well, Ndambizo Marashara from Zimbabwe passed away. and of course, Ngugi. I would say CLR James is from Trinidad. Those, they run the gamut from political theorists to literary critics to there are many things, and it depends on what time. But the beginnings have always been, what was available was that African writers series, Chinua Achebe and Ngugi, etc. And of course, I must mention there's quite a few people in the Harlem Renaissance, and of course there's also musical influences like Gil Scott-Heron, who is a poet and many other things. Really a political troubadour.
Well, one thing I've noticed with African and foreign writers, authors, are that they try to depict a narrative on places that is somewhat very unfamiliar with mainstream readers here in America. And a lot of them, some of them struggle in really being very transparent in terms of communicating, a specific setting or a specific description of various things. Even in your book, I saw a lot of very unfamiliar things that people might be unfamiliar with in terms of that revolves around the whole story, such as the clan element, currency system based on exchange of camels and so forth. Considering this, what method did you use to help mainstream readers follow the story in a transparent manner?
Well, I think I try to organize it as faithfully as possible to what it is, without going into fragmented concepts of it, but using it as a large, going through lineage and stuff and going to the larger organizations of it, such as clan is based on this patrilineal relationships, and they extend through either the mother, and the patrilineal one is more dominant. That's the explanation of it. But how those relations are close or tight are also diffused or actually explored in the sense that you realize that relationships, although they might be by clan, but they're actually exploitative based on personal ambition.
In a way that they can understand.
No, everyone can understand that. I mean, I'm not. What the point is that the writer has to put something on canvas, and there has to be a meeting somewhere where the reader also tries to formulate this thing.
Even some publishers I've read even use surveys to try to see if people understand what the specific.
Yeah, I think when you write, you try and put down as much as you can. At least for me, I mean, if I was looking for people to understand, then I would probably not use the right names. Meaning in the sense that I assume to begin with that people are going to understand because I'm writing in a certain way that is approachable, not to actually dilute everything to a point where I just am catering to some idea or vision of somebody. So if you look at the title of the book, it's Guban. It's in Somali. If you go in a bookstore, you wouldn't know. So so there it is. Already there's an issue. Somebody has to be curious enough.
Let me read more from the book for our listeners since we're kind of short on time here. On chapter 31, titled "Last Legs," page 249 reads, "All of a sudden, there was a lot of noise outside. Hug said his soldiers were trying to force their way into the office, each blocking the other one in a hurry to get to Ali. They were each shouting their own threats, the gist of it which was, 'Let me take care of him.' Another would say, 'No, let me skin him alive.' Yet another was issuing threats to others. 'Listen, guys, none of you will touch him. He is mine. Do you know what he has done to me?' The theme is revenge. Revenge, revenge. We saw it in Libya. We feared in Syria. And we definitely saw it in Somalia. The oppressed want payback. What about forgiveness? Was this part of your story?"
Yeah, that's actually what continues at that chapter, if you read it, is that although the person was egregiously, his whole life was turned around because Hoxie is the businessman that was originally locked up by Ali. Hoxie is looking for a new day. So part of that liberation has to also encompass a certain amount of forgiveness and in the sense of forgiveness of allowing Ali to have his day in some sort of local or traditional tribunal. And so Ali was passed on to the authorities of that time, which is in part the guerrillas at that time.
To get back with.
So in other words, he wasn't given a mob justice. He was referred to a more organized one. So his fate at that point is is one that he will have his day in court, if you will.
Okay. I found the conclusion of the novel very interesting and political. On page 257 reads, he knew the head of the state that he was watching from the news, fighting the rebels. He saw how hated this government that he had propped with cash was, and how weapons were being precipitated into the base instincts of the city. He being the character Harold, the former ambassador. This to me links foreign powers to the atrocities of the Somali Civil War. What message is the story sending in highlighting this?
Well, it is, I think there's always a sense of distance and removal, and how when you live in the United States or in other Western countries, you think of people in Somalia or other places as this distant places where there's no one, there are only pirates, warlords, and things like that. So the reality of it is that there was a Cold War, there was political interest. Till today, there's a lot of interest. I mean, there's the war on terror. So those are the things that the public
is not aware of.
Yeah. And that's what is the idea of the whole thing, is to have some faith in humanity and agency, so that if they know this information, that they will, if you will, oppose policies that are inhuman or unacceptable to
also,
other people.
Another thing that I found very, very interesting is the character Tusmo. She flees a broken Somalia. This to me symbolizes the population outflow and the creation of the Somali diaspora identity. Is that what you were trying to get across?
Yes, yeah, but not only that, but it's also usually it's depicted in a different way. And what I try to, and she leaves much earlier on than the actual influx. This is probably around 80s, 85, 84. So her incident is a beginning almost of a later what is going to happen to everyone. But the whole idea is to show the methods of which injustice accumulated. And Tusmo was one example of it. But at the same time, I had to. I was keeping the canvas in terms of the daily things that she was doing. She was, although had a husband locked up, she was trying to get away. And in fact, one of the people from the regime, from so-called, what is it called, from the people who should have been with the elite, same people who actually drove her out of the country. Yeah. So there's a.
So it can mean a lot of things.
Not only that, but there's a relationship between human beings.
Okay.
The whole idea is that people usually look at things in a essentialized way, in a whole scale way, and they say they did all this, but there were different things happening at the same time. I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but Tusmo exemplifies. You have to understand that I was also getting away from the narrative of violence, this and that, which is always depicted as a refugee. But I wanted to show that journey and how real it was for her without all this hyperbole kind of thing.
So Guban is one of a trilogy.
Yes, actually 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when can we expect the next one?
I don't know, man. I don't know.
Depends on.
I'm actually working on the doorman now. It's a work in progress. The doorman he's an East African immigrant who's a doorman working in Manhattan, and he's by day he works as a doorman. And by night he's a genius painter. And he's from Somalia too.
So
but this one is set in Manhattan. The rest of those books will be coming shortly after that. This has just come out, this year. I'm hoping within the following years to come, each one will, it took me about 3 years to write that one.
Wow.
Yeah, so...
For our listeners, I'm sure a lot of them are very interested in Guban by now.
Yeah.
Where can they buy the book from?
Well, you can buy them at most outlets. Amazon, Barnes & Nobles. If you're in New Zealand, you can get it.
What about here? What about here in Minnesota?
In Minnesota,
is there any specific place that they
no,
can go?
not yet. I think we're trying to develop something, but I think all the regular things like Barnes and Nobles, Minnesota, the Amazon outlets, and things that are regular, that are online and can carry books. Usually, you can order them. You might not get it right away, but you might get it in a day from your local bookstore if you ask. And if you ask the libraries, I think some of them are already have them here in Minnesota. But the thing is this to ask for it at these counters, and they will order it. As far as anything else, I don't know at the
Abdi
moment.
Latif Ega, the author of Guban, thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
For those of you who are tuning in late, you can listen to our full program at our website at www.spr.fm. You can also go to YouTube, our channel, Somali Public TV, where you'll be able to see an actual video of Abdi Latif Ega in this program.
Somali